I'll teach you.
I begged him to help the patient, to save a life, but he laughed and said, "You'll explain it to me?" Then, in front of the crowded hospital reception, he slapped me hard. Everyone gasped, but he had no idea I wasn't just any nurse. I was the billionaire director's daughter. If you believe courage and truth always find a way, stay till the end. This story is full of suspense, betrayal, and justice. Like, subscribe, and share. It proves that standing up for what's right can change everything. I walked into the hospital that morning, my bag slung lightly over my shoulder, trying to shake off the heaviness I felt. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the lobby, reflecting off the polished floors, making everything look deceptively calm. But I knew better. Hospitals were never calm. Not really. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, mixed with the nervous energy of patients and the hurried footsteps of doctors and nurses racing from one room to another. I greeted a few colleagues as I passed. "Morning, Aria," they said, some with genuine warmth, others with the kind of half-smiles that suggested curiosity or judgment. I returned their greetings politely, but I could feel the weight of the day pressing down on me. There was always tension in this hospital, a quiet competition for attention, approval, and recognition. And then there was him, the doctor everyone feared, Dr. Alcott. He had that cold, calculating look, like the world existed only for his convenience. He didn't just command respect, he demanded it with an arrogance that made ordinary staff like me feel small. I tried to focus on my tasks, checking patient charts and preparing for the rounds, but a sharp tug of worry pulled at me. One of the patients, a man in room 312, wasn't stable. His vitals had been fluctuating all night, and I'd already flagged it several times. The nurses before me had been hesitant to push too hard. He was a VIP's relative, and the doctor was known to dismiss even the most urgent warnings if they didn't suit him. My stomach knotted. I hated feeling powerless, especially when a life was hanging in the balance. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This wasn't the first time I had watched someone suffer because arrogance and pride got in the way of care, but that didn't make it any easier. I reminded myself to stay calm, to stay polite. My job was to care, not to confront, but my gut told me that ignoring this would be catastrophic. I approached the nurse's station, quietly checking the latest readings, noting the slight dip in oxygen levels, the rising heart rate. My fingers hovered over the phone, debating whether I should call for assistance or wait for the doctor's rounds. The morning moved fast, each second carrying its own weight. Patients wheeled in on stretchers, relatives pacing in anxious circles, the constant beeping of monitors and phones creating a rhythm that was impossible to ignore. I caught a glimpse of Dr. Alcott from the corner of my eye, his expression dismissive as he reviewed a chart, barely acknowledging the chaos around him. My heart sank. I knew what was coming. I would have to speak up, to insist, to push against that arrogance. And deep down I braced myself, because standing up to him in this hospital, in front of staff and patients, would not be easy. But even as fear tightened around my chest, I felt something else. A quiet determination. This patient's life mattered more than his ego, and somehow I knew that the choice I was about to make would change everything. I swallowed hard as I stepped closer to Dr. Alcott, trying to steady my voice. "Doctor, please, Mr. Ramesh in room 312. His oxygen levels are dropping and his heart rate is unstable. We need to start treatment immediately." I kept my tone calm, professional but firm. My hands were steady, though my heart raced. He barely glanced up from the papers in his hand, his eyes cold and unyielding. "You'll explain it to me, nurse," he said, a cruel smirk forming on his face. "Do you think I can't see what's happening?" His words dripped with condescension, but it wasn't just that. It was the arrogance, the complete disregard for the patient's life that made my blood boil. I took a small step forward. "Doctor, I'm not questioning your knowledge, but the patient's condition is deteriorating. Every second counts. Please, check his vitals now, before it's too late." I spoke louder, a little more insistently, but still polite. I wasn't trying to challenge him personally. I was trying to save a life. For a moment, he just stared at me. The hallway seemed to go quiet. I could feel the eyes of other staff on us, some tense, some curious, some afraid. I could hear the faint beeping of the monitor from room 312 echoing like a countdown. And then, he snapped. I hadn't expected it. Not that fast, not that violently. With a swift motion, he swung his hand and slapped me across the face. Hard. The world seemed to tilt for a second. Gasps echoed around the reception. Some staff froze, some whispered hurriedly, and I felt a sting hotter than the slap itself. The humiliation, the disbelief that this could happen in the middle of a crowded hospital. I placed a hand on my cheek, tasting blood from the split lip, trying to stay upright, trying to breathe. My chest burned with a mix of anger and shame. My legs trembled, but I didn't fall. I had to remain composed. Patients and visitors watched, shocked, unable to look away. Even the nurses who had trained with me for years seemed frozen, unsure if they should intervene. And yet, in that moment, I realized something. The pain, the humiliation. They could not break me. Not today. I had stood up for a life, for what was right, and no one, not even Dr. Alcott, could take that from me. I straightened, meeting his eyes, and said quietly but firmly, "The patient's life comes before your pride. Treat him now, or I will make sure everyone here knows the truth." The words came out calm, controlled, but underneath there was fire, anger, determination, and a refusal to be dismissed. He blinked, stunned, not by fear, but by audacity. I could see the first crack in his arrogance, though he masked it quickly with irritation. The hospital seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next, and I knew deep down that nothing would ever be the same again. I felt the sting of the slap for more than just the physical pain. It was the humiliation, the weight of everyone's eyes on me, the whispering staff, and the curious gazes of patients and visitors alike. My cheek burned, but I refused to let it show on my face. I straightened my back, lifted my chin, and forced my trembling hands to stay steady. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I stepped back, trying to find a corner away from the crowd, a small space where I could gather my thoughts. My heart still pounded, my ears still rang from the gasp that had rippled through the lobby, but I reminded myself that the slap didn't define me. My courage, my knowledge, and my sense of duty did. And the patient still needed help. That was far more important than my pride. As I checked the monitor again, I noticed the subtle dips in vitals, the telltale signs that the patient's condition could worsen rapidly. Anger surged through me, not at the doctor, but at the system that allowed arrogance to put lives at risk. I clenched my fists, trying to calm myself. I knew I had to act, carefully, without giving him any more reason to lash out. Walking past the reception desk, I caught glimpses of my colleagues' faces. Some were shocked, unsure of what to do. Others avoided my gaze entirely. A few looked at me with a quiet admiration I hadn't noticed before. Maybe they saw something I hadn't seen in myself, the resilience, the refusal to be silenced. I realized then that this moment, as humiliating as it was, had revealed a strength within me I hadn't fully acknowledged. I thought about my life outside this hospital, about who I really was. For years, I had hidden my background, my family, my privileges. To everyone here, I was just Aria, a simple nurse. But that part of me, the part they couldn't see, was patient, observant, intelligent, and most importantly, it was powerful. I didn't need anyone else to defend me. I could fight for what was right on my own. I straightened my uniform, brushed the hair back from my face, and allowed a faint, controlled smile. I wouldn't let this humiliation define me. I wouldn't let fear dictate my actions. I would wait, observe, and choose my moment carefully. The world might have expected me to crumble, to be intimidated, to remain silent. But I was already planning my next move, silently, strategically, and with a quiet determination that would leave no room for arrogance to hide. Even as the doctor walked past, smirking as if nothing had happened, I met his gaze steadily. Inside, I was alive with purpose. This was only the beginning. And when the truth came out, when my identity was revealed, when justice was served, I would stand tall, unshaken, and untouchable. I moved quickly, but carefully, toward room 312. The patient's monitor beeped rapidly, each sound slicing through the tension in my chest. His oxygen levels were dangerously low, his breathing shallow. My fingers hovered over the controls, double-checking the readings, making calculations in my mind. Time was slipping away, and every second mattered. I knew I had to act before Dr. Alcott noticed or intervened again. Not because I doubted my skills, I had trained for this, but because I couldn't trust his judgment at that moment. Arrogance often overshadowed competence in him, and right now, it could cost a life. My pulse raced, my palms were clammy, but I reminded myself to stay calm. Panic would solve nothing. As I adjusted the patient's oxygen supply and called for the immediate attention of the attending staff, I felt a presence behind me. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Whispers floated through the hospital corridors. Someone important was asking questions, someone watching, observing the chaos. And then I heard it. The mention of my name, carried with curiosity and authority. The director had arrived. I could feel his gaze even before he stepped fully into the room. He was a tall figure, commanding presence, calm but sharp, his eyes scanning the scene like a hawk. I didn't need him to intervene. My priority was still the patient, but I knew this was the moment when the tides could turn. Every action, every decision mattered now, not just for the patient, but for the respect and authority I had quietly built over the years. I continued my work, checking vitals, speaking softly to the patient to keep him calm, instructing the nurses with precise efficiency. All the while, I could sense the director's curiosity growing, piecing together the story from the reactions of the staff, the tension in the air, the hushed whispers that had followed the slap. They had no idea that I was more than just the nurse they thought I was. Dr. Alcott, unaware that he was under the director's scrutiny, continued to act as if he owned the hospital, checking charts with a bored expression, failing to see the danger that lingered in room 312. My jaw tightened. This was exactly why I had insisted before, and why I would insist again if necessary. Lives were not to be compromised for pride. I felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that, even without revealing my identity, I had the control. I had the knowledge. I had the patience and the courage to do what was right, no matter how arrogant or cruel the obstacles. And somewhere in the background, the director's steady, observant gaze reminded me that this was only the beginning. In that moment, I realized that power was not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it was calm, sometimes it was patience, and sometimes it was waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth. I could feel the tension in the air as the director stepped fully into the reception area. The crowd of staff and patients seemed to hold its breath, as if sensing something monumental was about to happen. I kept my hands steady at my sides, my face calm, though inside, my heart pounded like a drum. This was the moment that everything could change. My courage, my patience, my years of hidden strength, all of it culminating in a single confrontation. Dr. Alcott didn't notice at first. He continued reviewing charts, completely absorbed in his own self-importance, oblivious to the director's piercing gaze. I knew I had to act carefully. One wrong word, one misstep, and the humiliation I had already endured could turn into something far worse. But I also knew that silence was no longer an option. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Doctor," I said, my voice calm but firm, carrying clearly across the reception. "The patient's condition is still critical. Immediate treatment is necessary. I insist you act now." The doctor's head snapped up, his eyes flashing with irritation. "And who do you think you are questioning me?" he demanded, his voice sharp and loud enough to draw attention from every corner of the lobby. Before I could respond, the director spoke. His voice was steady, commanding, and it cut through the tension like a knife. "Aria, step forward." All eyes turned to me. The doctor froze, confusion flickering across his face. I moved slowly, deliberately, letting every step show my composure, my confidence, my quiet authority. The whispers of the staff and the shocked gasps of visitors only fueled the weight of the moment. The director's gaze softened slightly as he looked at me, then hardened as he addressed the doctor. "Do you realize who you are speaking to?" he asked, voice calm but filled with unmistakable power. I let the moment hang, then spoke, my voice clear, unwavering. "I am the daughter of the director, and I will not allow arrogance to put a patient's life at risk. The decision you make now will define not just your actions, but your integrity as a professional." The doctor's eyes widened, shock and fear mingling with the remnants of his arrogance. The lobby was silent. Colleagues, patients, even visitors all waited, holding their breath as the reality settled over the room. For the first time, the power balance had shifted completely. I felt a quiet satisfaction, but I didn't gloat. I had acted with purpose, with patience, and with courage. The truth had been revealed not with loud threats or anger, but with calm certainty. And as the doctor's facade crumbled, I realized something important. Real authority comes not from fear, but from knowledge, integrity, and the strength to stand for what is right, even when everyone is watching. The silence in the lobby stretched for a moment, heavy and complete, before it finally broke. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, first tentative, then louder, as the reality sank in. Dr. Alcott, who had spent years cultivating fear and arrogance, was finally facing the consequences of his actions. For once, his authority was challenged, and he had no words to defend himself. I watched him shift uncomfortably, realizing that the staff and even visitors were no longer looking at him with respect. They were looking with judgment. The director's gaze was steady on him, quiet but unmistakably powerful. I didn't need my father to intervene directly. The moment had already shifted because of what I had done. My calmness, my persistence, my refusal to back down had spoken louder than any words could. Nurses who had been hesitant before stepped forward, checking on the patient with urgency, following the procedures I had outlined. The hospital staff began to murmur approval, acknowledging my actions without needing a single announcement. The respect I had quietly earned over the years now became visible, tangible. I felt a subtle swell of pride, but it wasn't about ego. It was about justice finally being served. The doctor's face flushed, his arrogance replaced by frustration and fear. He muttered excuses, but no one listened. I saw him glance around the room, searching for allies, realizing that no one would support him this time. His reputation, carefully built over years, was crumbling in front of everyone who had once feared him. I stepped back slightly, allowing the staff to take over, while I remained composed. I didn't need to flaunt my identity further. The director's presence, my actions, and the reactions of everyone in the room said it all. The patient's condition stabilized under the proper care, and I could finally breathe a little easier, knowing that life had been saved because I had spoken up. As I straightened my uniform and brushed a loose strand of hair from my face, I felt a shift inside me. The humiliation of the slap, the sneers, the whispered judgments, they no longer had power over me. I had transformed them into strength. I had proven that courage, knowledge, and integrity could triumph over cruelty and arrogance, even without external rescue. Later, as the hospital gradually returned to its usual rhythm, colleagues approached me quietly, offering smiles, nods, and subtle words of admiration. It was recognition not given loudly, but earned through action. I realized then that real respect doesn't come from titles or fear. It comes from standing firm when it matters most. And in that quiet moment, I understood something deeper. Power isn't always visible. Sometimes it's patience, sometimes it's courage, sometimes it's knowing when to act and when to wait. Today, all of that had come together, and justice had been served, not with vengeance, but with truth and integrity. As the day wound down and the hospital's chaos slowly faded, I found a quiet corner to gather my thoughts. The adrenaline had subsided, leaving a calm clarity in its wake. I thought about the morning, the crowded lobby, the harsh slap, the eyes of patients and staff upon me. I thought about Dr. Alcott, whose arrogance had finally met its match, and the patient whose life had teetered on the edge. It struck me how fragile respect can be, and how quickly power can shift when courage meets opportunity. I didn't need anyone to fight for me. I didn't need my father to appear or to intervene. All I needed was to stand firm, to speak up, and to act when it mattered most. In that moment, I realized that true strength isn't always loud or dramatic. It's quiet, deliberate, and unwavering. I let myself smile, not from triumph over another, but from pride in my own integrity. Humiliation and fear had tried to define me, but I refused to let them. I had discovered something important about myself. Patience, knowledge, and moral courage are forces stronger than cruelty, arrogance, or public judgment. And when those forces are combined with action at the right time, even the most powerful can be held accountable. The staff who had witnessed the confrontation approached me later, offering quiet words of respect, nods, and smiles. It was subtle, but meaningful. A recognition not for my wealth or title, but for standing up when it counted. And for the first time in years, I felt completely seen, completely respected, and completely in control of my own destiny. I reflected on the lesson this day had taught me. Life will present moments where you are underestimated, dismissed, or even humiliated. In those moments, it's not about seeking revenge or waiting for someone else to save you. It's about finding your inner strength, using your knowledge, and standing firmly for what is right. Integrity, courage, and persistence are not always visible to the world, but they are noticed by the ones who matter, the people whose lives are affected by your actions. And as I left the hospital that evening, the sun casting golden light across the lobby, I felt a quiet satisfaction. The world hadn't needed to see my power because the power had already been revealed in my actions. The arrogance that had once threatened to break me had been replaced by respect, dignity, and the knowledge that I could rise, even in the face of cruelty. Sometimes the strongest victories are the ones no one applauds, but the impact is felt by everyone. And I knew that today I had won in the only way that truly mattered, by standing tall, by saving a life, and by showing that courage and integrity are more powerful than fear. If this story inspired you to stand up for what's right, hit like, share it with someone who needs courage, and subscribe for more dramatic stories of justice, suspense, and unexpected twists. Remember, true strength speaks even without shouting.